afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Qatar Transportation webcast entitled Enhancing Cybersecurity in Public Transportation. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our three presenters today. Our first presenter will be Dr. Sean Barbeau. He is a principal mobile software architect here at Qatar at the University of South Florida. His research interests include multimodal mobile apps, open source software, standardized open data, and cybersecurity for mobile phones and transportation infrastructure. We also have Dr. Jay Lagati. He's a professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering here at the University of South Florida. His research areas are software security and programming language. His research programs have focused on improving security of transportation systems and data, web application, executable binaries, and user authentication systems. Our last presenter today is Kevin Dennis. Kevin is a PhD student here in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of South Florida. His research interests include software security, cybersecurity for transportation infrastructure. And with that being said, I'm going to hand the time over to Dr. Sean Barbeau. Sean, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephanie. So today we're going to be talking about a project that we recently completed. This was enhancing cybersecurity in public transportation, funded by the Florida Department of Transportation and the National Center for Transit Research. So Jay Lagati and myself were PIs on this project, and then Kevin Dennis and Maxat Alabayev were also part of our research team. And our FDOT project manager for this project was Gabe Matthews. So in today's presentation, we're going to go over our project in general and some background, and provide an overview and some of the research outputs that came out of this project. Talk about some of the working groups that we held during this project, and also some workshops that we organized. Go through some discussion and recommendations that were the results of these various activities, and then talk about some future research directions and conclusions. So cybersecurity, most people have heard of this. This has been in the news for many years now. In transportation in particular, infrastructure is exposed to the public in a lot of different ways. In public transportation, you have people getting on and off of buses, using things like mobile apps, and just touching a lot of different technologies. So if any of this infrastructure is compromised, it could do harm to transit agencies or users of the system. So back in 2013, the Florida legislature recognized that cybersecurity was a growing problem and something that needed to be addressed, and formed the Florida Center for Cybersecurity, which is now called Cyber Florida, and transportation was named as a focus area as part of Cyber Florida's organizing mission. So looking more specifically at public transportation, there has been some general high-level research. These two documents we kind of point to specifically that do recognize public transportation. There is a huge risk there in their almost cybersecurity. So this One Transit Cooperative Research Program report flagged that these various interconnected systems created enormous underappreciated complexity and significantly greater vulnerability across the entire system. And the situation is poorly understood by transportation system executives, program managers, employees, elected officials, and regulators. And similarly, a report from APTA said that many transit agencies do not adequately address cybersecurity issues despite the known risks. So our project aimed to look at seeing if we could do something here in the state of Florida specifically to try and address some of these issues. So our objectives were to improve cybersecurity of public transportation systems in Florida by identifying and mitigating liabilities, transit cybersecurity liabilities, and also facilitate ongoing information exchange between the agencies, vendors, and cybersecurity researchers. And once again, this project was sponsored by FDOT and the National Center for Transit Research. So talking about technologies in public transportation, it really covers a lot of different areas. So you can have things like onboard Wi-Fi where riders can surf the internet from their mobile phone or laptop. mobile applications used for things like paying fares, automatic vehicle location or AVL systems that track vehicles, which can be used for operations purposes, as well as sharing real-time information with passengers of where their bus is. Real-time information APIs, so these are programming interfaces used by software applications. So you could, for example, the transit agency can share where their buses are with external apps like Google or Apple Maps. Traffic signal preemption and priority, so this is where the transit vehicle is somehow communicating with the traffic infrastructure to perhaps accelerate the light traffic signal cycle so that the bus isn't sitting waiting at the light. And then you just have traditional IT systems like email, file exchange that are used as part of the agency operations. And also a fairly newer area to look at is automated and connected vehicles, or AV-CVs. Public transportation is an early adopter of AV-CVs, which we saw here. We'll talk about this in a little few more slides. So as part of this project, we did a literature review that looked at a lot of different sources of literature, specifically at technologies that have been deployed in public transportation, but where the literature typically did not address that technology in the context of public transportation. So we're trying to pull from existing research that have been done not in the context of public transportation, but then focus that in the area of public transportation. So the technologies that we looked at were fare payment, onboard Wi-Fi, automatic passenger counters, AVL, traffic signal preemption, AV-CVs, general office information, for example, email and mobile apps. So this lit review was published in the Transportation Research Board conference proceedings last year. We've also presented some of the findings at the FPTA and some other working groups, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So if anyone is interested in obtaining a copy of the literature review, just let us know, and we can point you to this. This will also be published as part of the final report for the project, which will be published by FDOT shortly, and we'll talk about that later. As part of this project, we also did a survey of Florida transit agencies. This was trying to get an idea of the current and future technology deployment plans for transit agencies in Florida, the current scope of AVs and CVs, where they deployed and who's planning on deploying them, some of the damage management techniques taking place at agencies, and also any experiences or concerns agencies had in the area of cybersecurity. So this graph shows one particular set of results from the survey responses for which technologies were deployed by transit agencies in Florida. So as you can see on the left-hand side of the graph, some of the most common technologies are communication systems, followed by closed-circuit TV, security cameras, and then CAT AVL for tracking vehicles, fare payment, et cetera. So 3 agencies responded that they had already deployed AVs in some capacity. One of those projects had been shut down they believe they were running school buses with autonomous vehicles, and decided that ultimately, I guess, wasn't a good idea. There was one agency that responded that they had deployed connected vehicles, but then somewhat surprisingly, 10 agencies were planning on deploying CVs or AVs in the next 6 years. So we should see a pretty rapid uptick in deployments, which I think corresponds to generally what we see in the news of the popularity of AVs and CVs. Some of the key survey results that we found, the most widely deployed technologies, communication systems, security cameras, were also considered the most operationally critical, so the most disruptive potentially to operations if they were taken down. Fare payment systems were found to be the most financially critical, so what would hurt the agency the most if financially if they were deemed inoperable. 2 transit agencies reported that they were impacted by cybersecurity issues, and these were website or Facebook pages that were compromised, phishing attempts, and one instance of data theft. 2 agencies stated that they did not have any cybersecurity challenges, which we saw as potentially a red flag. This is really something that agencies should be thinking about. Even if you don't think you have any challenges, there's usually some there. Commonly reported challenges for good security practices, the top 2 were employee training in funding. Approximately 40% of the agencies responded that customer information wasn't encrypted or they didn't know if it was encrypted. And we believe that this may be attributed to some of that information being maintained by third parties where the agency doesn't really know how that third party is managing customer information. So from a privacy perspective, we see this as something critical that agencies should really address quickly. We also saw that onboard Wi-Fi served two different uses. In one case, for passenger access to the internet, so surfing the internet from your laptop. And in the other case was transferring data offboard from the vehicle. So for example, synchronizing schedule changes with the bus system for the onboard signs or other information that's needed on board the vehicle. So whenever you're using the Wi-Fi or any system for dual uses where it's exposed to the public but also being used for something that's operationally critical, you really need to take a close look at security to make sure that somebody couldn't access that critical information. As part of this project, we also developed a taxonomy of technologies, of transit technologies. We looked at different dimensions here, so called out deployments in Florida, which mode of transportation they affected. So for example, bus versus something like a traffic system, which functionality, so fare payments, passenger counters, traffic signal priority, organizational ownership, so who's in charge of that technology, a city or transit agency, and also looking at security liabilities. And similarly, this will be published as part of the final report if anyone is interested in the details. And we actually also have a paper on this that's been accepted that will be presented at the upcoming Transportation Research Board conference in 2020. We also, as part of this project, Kevin specifically worked on looking at mobile fare payment apps, and we looked at a mobile fare payment app that was deployed in Florida and found a vulnerability in that application where you could effectively log in as one user and then change some information and then change your user ID to pull back information for any other user in the system after you are authenticated with your own user account. So this enables you to access information for any other user in the system, potentially pulling back information like names, phone numbers, last four digits of credit card numbers. Interestingly, this particular mobile fare payment application, this vendor also provides parking payment solutions, and it seems, or they did implement this with a shared database. So the same system that stores transit fare payment information also stores parking payment information. So we were also able to access vehicle information from users of that other application, which includes license plate numbers and parking locations, the parking history of that particular user. So you can see some examples, screenshots here on the right, where we were able to pull back information in the app for a user that was not the same user that we logged in as when we initially started up the app. So as many as 40 different organizations may have been affected by this vulnerability, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second here, across between transit agencies and cities. We followed the responsible disclosure process for this vulnerability, so we provided this information to the vendor and the agency, and then before it was announced publicly or released publicly, and this vulnerability was patched within 4 weeks of being reported to the vendor. So one interesting aspect of this is the number of users of the mobile transit fare payment app that we looked at was relatively small. There was about 15,000 users. But because the vendor used a shared database across apps for a lot of different cities, including their own app, which covered several cities, but then they also did a practice that's called white labeling, which is where the same app is deployed individually for say, Tampa, San Diego, Washington, D.C., New York, and each of those instances has a different entry in the App Store and a name specific to that particular city or deployment. So all told, when you look at this, the red section of the graph indicates the main app that's maintained by the vendor. The purple section is the number of users for all of these white labeled versions of the application. And then way down at the bottom in light blue, the sliver is the number of users of the app that we looked at. So even though the app that we looked at only had about 15,000 users, when you total up all these different users' data that was stored in the same database, we're estimating this vulnerability may have affected up to about 1.5 million users across 40 different cities. When we look at past data breaches, there's a National Cooperative Highway Research Program, NCHRP project that attempted to quantify the cost for data breaches. The estimate they came up with was $121 per record. And so we're estimating that by finding and patching this vulnerability, it may have potentially avoided costs up to about $188 million in potential consequences if this vulnerability would have been exploited. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Dennis, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the cybersecurity working groups that we had as part of this project, as well as the workshops that we conducted.
All right. Hello, everyone. So as part of our goal to kind of facilitate information exchange with the different agencies and organizations, one of the things we wanted to do was host 10 web meetings over the lifespan of the project. So our goal was to bring together 3 different stakeholders, the Florida transit agencies, the Florida Center for Cybersecurity, or Cyber Florida now, and Florida cybersecurity researchers, both from industry and academia. And so the objectives of these working groups were to be proactive and to identify new concerns and mitigations, and then to also be reactive and consider existing and known vulnerabilities and best practices for preventing exploits. So here is a list of the different presentations we had. We had a good wide range of different topics. So for example, we had we had several guest speakers, including Cybersecurity for Smart Mobility Initiatives by Scott Keith from the City of Tampa and Rick Teen from Mission Secure. We also had other guest presentations that talked about FDOT regulatory safety and security infrastructure, ISAC or ISAO programs, which are information sharing, SCMS for connected vehicles, and then FDOT triennial compliance review from Reno. So now we'll talk a bit about the workshops. So we wanted to organize and host technical workshops that would allow students to also learn more about cybersecurity in transportation. So we wanted to host 3 technical workshops aimed at identifying and evaluating potential vulnerabilities in transit technologies. And so these were aimed to bring together both the Florida Center for Cybersecurity, or Cyber Florida, students of cybersecurity from USF and other universities, cybersecurity researchers, and Florida transit agencies. So the 3 events that we hosted were a mobile fare payment workshop on November 9th last year, a traffic cabinet security workshop on January 25th of this year, and a cybersecurity and public transportation faculty workshop, which was held on April 16th. So the first workshop on mobile fare payment applications, it was targeted at teaching students Android app vulnerability analysis using hands-on transit examples. So this workshop actually included an overview of the discovered vulnerability. So we kind of walked them through the high-level process of how we discovered the vulnerability. We didn't show them how to actually exploit the vulnerability, but kind of the different tools and skills that you would need to discover this on your own. So an estimated 17 students attended this, including members of the White Hatters Computer Security Club and representative from SoftWorks. So the second workshop on traffic cabinet security introduced students to traffic cabinet technologies and security. So we actually we have a traffic cabinet that was donated by the City of Tampa, which we brought students in We actually opened it up, and they were able to actually get hands-on with it and interact and push all the buttons and all that fun stuff. So it included a presentation both from the research team, which kind of introduced students to the different technologies that are present in the cabinet, and also included a presentation from Mission Secure, which discussed the different potential attack scenarios you could see if a attacker were to actually exploit this in the wild. So attendance for this was at 33 participants, and again included students from the White Hatters Computer Security Club here on campus. And so yeah, students were encouraged to investigate the traffic cabinet, and some of the students were actually able to successfully place the cabinet in a flashing state by setting some misconfigurations in the controller itself.
And the result of that flashing state is it would be, I guess, a yellow flashing light on the traffic light, right? So that would be effectively green and red, stop working, and everybody's kind of fending for themselves to try to cross the intersection.
Here is a picture of the traffic cabinet that was donated by the City of Tampa. So some of the vulnerabilities that we were kind of looking at were easy physical access, default or no username/password for the controller, an easy to trigger fault state, and no authentication or encryption for communication with TMC. And so these cabinets are mostly equipped with technologies to kind of prevent these vulnerabilities, but a lot of times they just go unused. So for example, a lot of times the controller has the ability to have a password required for when you want to log into it, but by default it's not enabled, and from what we've seen in the literature review, it goes mostly unused by a lot of transit agencies or organizations.
And it's just, I think, primarily because it's a huge headache, right, to maintain like a list of thousands of passwords and username and password combinations that correspond with a particular cabinet. Yeah. And the third workshop was a faculty workshop that brought together 13 professors from Florida universities, including the University of Florida, the University of South Florida, FSU, and FIU. They were invited to present their research and discuss cybersecurity and public transportation. So this, again, covered a very wide range of topics, which included privacy and intelligent transportation systems, connected and autonomous vehicles, denial of service attacks and transportations, and several others, including an analysis of drones and drone sensors and a couple other topics. So it also invited transit agency employees and graduate students who were allowed to come in person and attend and join in on the discussion. And we had about 5 of those guests attend.
And just to jump in real quick, a summary of all of these workshops and more details will be included in the final report for the project.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting work going on. So I'm going to pick up here with some of the discussion and recommendations of this project. So going back to this mobile fare payment app vulnerability that we discovered, so we realized after we discovered this vulnerability, it really wasn't clear to us what we were supposed to do with this. So some larger tech companies have very well-defined vulnerability disclosure processes where it kind of outlines what the expected protocol is for the person that finds the vulnerability, a point of contact to share it with, and expectations of how it would be managed. So we really didn't find any of that in place. And to be fair, not only for the agency that we found this vulnerability for, but also any other Florida transit agency. As far as we could tell, there were no publicly available responsible disclosure processes in place on any Florida transit agency websites. So we reported this vulnerability to transit agency staff that was participating in the working group, and they apparently shared it with the vendor. And we checked back and found that within the 4 weeks that they had patched the issue. To our knowledge, no end users or agencies were informed by the vendor that a vulnerability that was potentially leaking personal data was discovered.
And the vendor didn't contact us regarding patching and fixing the vulnerability either.
Yes, yeah. So we realized this by going back and just checking again, retrying the same thing, and figuring out that it didn't work, and therefore it hadn't been fixed.
So there is essentially one communication that happened.
Yes.
There's us sending one email explaining the vulnerability, and then I think we have one more email where we checked with the agency whether they'd heard anything about it, but that's the extent of the communication as far as I recall.
Yes, that's correct. So I think obviously there's it's in everyone's best interest, I think, to have a more well-defined process, which we'll talk about in a slide or two here. So looking at current Florida policy, so there is a Florida Protection Information Act that was passed in 2014 that requires government and private entities to provide notification within 30 days after a breach affecting 500 or more individuals in Florida is discovered. However, looking at that law, as far as we can tell, the data that we were able to pull out of the mobile application doesn't strictly meet that statute's definition of personally identifiable information, or PII. So the definition of PII in this law is very narrow. It's driver's license numbers, social security numbers, or plain text user names and passwords. So even though, I mean, information that we were able to pull out, which includes email addresses, parking history, partial credit card numbers, license plate numbers, none of that falls under this Florida Information Protection Act law. So as far as we can tell, the agency actually didn't have any legal obligation to report this to users, given current Florida law. Other states have different laws regarding data breaches and PII definitions. So there's actually a law going into effect in January in California that has a much more well-defined, much broader definition of PII, which would have covered the information that we found, and also includes more well-defined processes for vulnerability disclosures, and as well as potential consequences from breaches. So it's kind of just a patchwork, though, across the United States right now. There's no federal laws that we were able to find regarding data breach notification laws. So every state can be different in terms of obligations for companies or agencies, as well as the actual definition of PII for that particular state. So at FDOT's request to try and provide some structure related to vulnerability disclosures, we provided some suggested language for Florida Rule 1490. So the Florida Rule 1490 currently addresses safety procedures for Florida transit agencies, and there's a very well-defined process related to training and other things for safety that we believe cybersecurity could fit into. So policies, training, reporting, emergency management, incident investigation, documenting drills and exercises, monitoring contractors. There's very well-established safety protocols for all of this for transit agencies in Florida, but cybersecurity is not part of this at all as of today, and we think it could definitely fit into the same structure. So here's our particular Rule 1490 language recommendations that we've provided to FDOT for consideration. So some of the high-level points here are that the agency should provide a single public point of contact for reporting vulnerability disclosures, should notify any parties who are affected or in danger, potentially at risk, including users of the system. There should be practical and timely steps taken to mitigate and recover from a vulnerability. The location for prominent public display of the policy, so the agency should have a place on its website where it talks about their policy, and also compliance then with the law, the Florida Information Protection Act. And also these obligations should flow down to any contractors for the agencies, which is the second paragraph M section here. So agencies often deploy mobile apps or other technologies that are primarily deployed and maintained by vendors or contractors, and all of these obligations should pass on to the contractors as well, including the fact that the contractor should be obligated to notify the agency itself. And there's certainly cases where a vulnerability may be discovered and the agency just never actually knows about it. So publicly available vulnerability disclosure policies, we feel may allow vulnerabilities to be quickly patched and improve communications between people that are finding the vulnerabilities and the people that are fixing them, so the agencies and the vendors. We think that some of the safety requirements, we mentioned the Rule 1490, may provide a starting point for introducing some cybersecurity requirements. We saw a lot of parallels in terms of reporting requirements, for example. Just right now, we don't really know how many incidents are happening in Florida because there's no standardized tracking or reporting of these. It would seem crazy at this point not to track safety-related incidents, and we feel that cybersecurity very much fits the same, has the same needs. So potential requirements for consideration are standards for data encryption, publicly available disclosure policies and contacts, notification requirements, and then audits and cybersecurity employee education. So again, very much mirrors some of the safety requirements that are in place for the state of Florida. So implications for agencies, things to think about if you're an agency and you're working with vendors. So think about how vulnerabilities are going to be addressed before one actually pops up. It's just like preparing for emergency, hurricanes or anything else. You really want to have a plan in place before something happens. So some of the questions to ask your vendors: does your vendor have a plan for addressing vulnerabilities? Will you be charged? So if someone comes to you and says, "Oh, we found the vulnerability," you go to your vendor, ask them, "Can you fix this?" They come back and say, "Sure, but it's going to cost you another $50,000." You really don't want to be in that position, trying to, looking at the wire of trying to fix something fast. So ask these questions ahead of time. Ask if they inform users of breaches. Will they inform you of a breach if one happens? And then also, do they conduct independent security audits as well? Is there someone else looking to see and verify that their systems are secure? So some recommendations for agencies coming out of all of this that we've learned. So just generally speaking, follow existing best practices for mitigating vulnerabilities. So review existing policies and procedures for how your organization handles cybersecurity. And on that note, too, don't just rely on IT. This is not just an IT-specific problem. This really flows, just like, safety isn't an operations-specific problem. It's really something that the organization as a whole needs to consider and look at in terms of how you respond to things, how you plan for things. Use secure authentication and encryption. Log access to sensitive infrastructure so you can go back and tell if something's been accessed when it shouldn't have been. Back up critical data in case of ransomware. There's been a number of, just during our project, probably 5 or 6 publicly.
High profile.
Yeah, very high profile ransomware cases where city governments were just ground to a standstill. In some cases, they ended up paying out the ransom just for the chance to get in their data back.
I think in all but one case, the city or the municipality ended up paying the ransom demanded. So it's very common that transit agencies or agencies in general would be paying the ransom.
Yeah, and that's just for a chance to get your data back. You really have, it's like paying any ransom. You really have no guarantee that just because you pay, you're actually going to get something in return too. So you definitely don't want to be in that situation. You want to have backups for data and systems that are critical so you can just restore those and not have to worry about it. Identify opportunities to improve employee training. Again, this is one of the top cited issues by agencies for their limitations for improving cybersecurity with employee training. Create a vulnerability disclosure process, so how you handle things both internally and then externally. So how can people report vulnerabilities to you? Track and report metrics, incidents to FDOT. Comply with the Florida Information Protection Act of 2014 if there is a breach, and then talk to your peers. I think a lot of the agencies that participated in the working group had a good experience of learning from others and just hearing what other people were doing and what worked and what didn't work from them. So our recommendations for FDOT coming out of this project was to quantify and track metrics for cybersecurity incidents from agencies. Again, if you don't really know what's happening, it's hard to tell if what you're doing is helping or if you need to address one particular area in particular. Offer resources to improve training and funding opportunities. Again, these were the top two agency-reported challenges for better cybersecurity. Consider the changes to the Rule 1490. We provided the recommended language that we talked about earlier for vulnerability disclosure processes. Consider incorporating cybersecurity alongside the existing safety and security assessments for the state of Florida, and also continue the cybersecurity working group. So we're going to talk about some future research directions here and then some general conclusions for the projects. So the first item here is just to develop security policies, cybersecurity policies that can be widely adopted. So there's definitely, we want these to be practical and useful and not overly burdensome or bureaucratic. So there's always a delicate balance to be found there. And we think that just like we didn't really have a solid handle on the vulnerability disclosure process until we actually went through it ourselves and kind of understood what, on both sides of the fence, I think, what the situation was. Similarly, we want to take a closer look at how some of the cybersecurity issues could be integrated into the safety reporting and auditing, et cetera. And again, the responsible vulnerability disclosure process is part of that. We also want to take a closer look at some of the technologies that we started looking at. So mobile fare payment applications, I think you Kevin, had only looked at like a few apps and then found this vulnerability. So there's still a lot more apps out there to look at. Also to take a closer look at some of the issues that we found with the traffic signal controllers and then communication on that network, which includes communication with the traffic management centers and then the integration with the transit and connected vehicles for traffic signal preemption and priority for modifying the traffic signal state based on the vehicles. And also onboard Wi-Fi, we feel this is one of the potential entry point, which is very widely exposed on buses and deserves further research. We'd also like to continue working with the work groups, workshops, and outreach. We feel that this really gave us, I think, a really good handle, some hands-on and